opposite in terms of some parts of the world. I think this rainbow nation of God is definitely not living up to the expectations that was in terms of April '94. I think the reason for it has a lot to do in terms of the negotiated settlement which came about. So the ANC was seen as this paragon of virtue, fighting for a united multiracial South Africa or non-racial South Africa, whereas the apartheid regime was seen as the embodiment of evil. And there are some severe problems there, because it wasn't so clear-cut. There were various black South African leaders who were playing for the other side. And on the other hand, you had white South Africans who had sacrificed their life for this dream as well. And there were even establishment figures, okay? And I think in the process of creating this false dichotomy, I think it's the basis of why we are facing such a crisis, because you're willing to acknowledge the atrocities committed by the apartheid state, but not what the ANC was doing. Specifically Umbukodo. Umbukodo was the ANC's counterintelligence arm, and they ran these torture camps, and the guys were trained by the Stasi, the former East Germans, and by the KGB. And by the way, our current president was the head of Umbukodo. Umbukodo means the stone that grinds. And it's actually quite important to understand this, because there's this amnesia in history textbooks. My son is in grade 9, and he studies apartheid in the school textbook, but there's absolutely, well, there's lots about the atrocities committed by the apartheid state, the Sharpeville massacre, Soweto 76, the 84-86 crushing of uprisings. There's nothing about the other side. And that's a very dangerous amnesia, because the ANC itself sees itself as not even a political party, that's the African National Congress, the ruling party, but they see themselves as a revolutionary party, which means, of course, all their opponents are counter-revolutionary, reactionary, and so on. And this is the kind of thing. They don't see themselves as a normal political party. They represent South Africa. Anyone who opposes them opposes the people. It's this classic vanguard mentality, which I find dangerous. And you know, as I mentioned here, many of the ANC guys studied in the former Soviet Union. They studied in East Germany, especially intelligence and torture techniques and so on. And I think this also kind of explains our positions in terms of the world. You know, our proximity to that guy who stayed in power for 42 years before his ass got kicked out, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, our proximity to that other idiot, Mobutu Sese Seko, who stole like crazy from his country, former Zaire, now the DRC, our proximity to Hamas, you know, our proximity to the despot to the north of us, Robert Mugabe. It says a lot about these kinds of things. The thing about being viewed as a revolutionary party, as a vanguard party, as a revolutionary movement, also means that there's no need for civil society, right? Because we represent the people. There's nothing outside the people, but we are the only representatives of the people, because we're the ones who fought apartheid. And of course, as I'm explaining to you, it was not so simple. There were lots of forces fighting against apartheid. So the ANC represents everyone. And so anyone who threatens the ANC is automatically regarded as enemies of the state. And that is despite the fact that I think we have one of the greatest constitutions on the planet. So for example, we have the spying on judges. So you have our intelligence apparatus spying on our judges, because our judges have been giving various red cards to the ANC. So what happened to checks and balances? There's the intimidation of journalists, okay, and spying on journalists. Our former National Police Commissioner, to give you an idea, Jackie Salebe, he was also head of Interpol. When the British was after a notorious drug smuggler called Glenn Agliotti, and warned him and asked him to put him on, to ask Selebe, our National Police Commissioner, to put this guy under surveillance, this drug trafficker. He warned the guy instead. He warned the guy instead because he was on the take. Subsequently, our next National Police Commissioner went and, Becky Chele, he had a company get all kinds of dividends from the South African police services. And when a journalist tried to show how corrupt these practices were, policemen tried to kill him. So this is the South Africa that you're talking about right now. It's not a pleasant place. Okay? The other problem is, which is related to this, is the politicization of the security apparatus. Okay? So you have your intelligence services. Okay? I was a serving officer in the Air Force, and I still am now, but I'm in the reserves. But when I took my oath to defend the Constitution and the Republic. Increasingly, you are there to defend the status quo. You are there to defend the president. You know, I don't see Obama, despite what the recent revelations from Edward Snowden is, to say, you know what, Mr. CIA, Mr. FBI, help me with Mitt Romney. I mean, that's normal politics. Okay, opposition and so on is normal politics. This is not how it's seen. The intelligence services of the state is increasingly seen that we are there to protect Zuma, which is not right. Recently, you had this wonderful Orwellian term, the Protection of Information Bill. Listen to this. The so-called Protection of Information Bill. Recently, there's been a number of leaks, including about Zuma stealing money and building his Nkandla palace and so on and so forth. So these were leaks on the inside of the government. So they passed this wonderful thing called the Protection of Information Bill. It actually sounds innocuous, right? Except that if you're a journalist and if somebody on the inside leaked to you that the president is engaging in wrongdoing, this is an act against the state. You are, that's high treason now suddenly. It's not whistleblowing, right? This is not good. So it prevents journalists from publishing information on corruption, punishes whistleblowers as the Trojan horses, as treasonous. And state institutions like Parliament have increasingly become a rubber stamp. In fact, they've been literally defanged. Okay, so while you have these checks and balances in terms of the Constitution, you appoint people who will not actually put too much of scrutiny onto the executive, which I think is extremely problematic. And those amazing people, like I'm sure you all have heard of one of our institutions is the Public Protector, and we have an amazing woman there called Tuli Madonsela. I mean, she now has to go around with bodyguards because she was the one who investigated the wrongdoing of the president, and she's received death threats. So if you do your job, I mean, that's the way you're going to go, right? And this isn't correct. So these trends, I think, illustrate a very bleak future for the country. The other problem is, if you look at the Transparency International Index, which monitors corruption, South Africa has been steadily going downwards on that list. In fact, South Africans call it the Nigerianization of South African politics, right? Because corruption occurs everywhere, right? I mean, it occurs in US politics, occurs in Europe, occurs in Africa. But the problem is where it becomes increasingly institutionalized. It becomes the norm and not the exception. And there's no punitive measures for those engaged in it, especially when they occupy senior positions, and in this case specifically, President Zuma and his family. And I really think that the weakness of South African democracies is now illustrated, that you have someone who is corrupt to his core, undemocratic, when he was supposed to give various transcripts to the Democratic Alliance by a High Court judge. He refuses. He refuses to obey court orders, right? Here's a guy who's been charged with rape 167 counts of fraud, and various other things. In no sane democracy on the planet, possibly North Korea and Zimbabwe, this guy would never have been up for election, leave alone winning re-election as he just recently did. I mean, corruption costs us between 50 and 100 billion rand a year, and this is not the US. We can't afford it. We're a developing country. And in all of this, it's the poorest of the poor who suffer, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I work at a university. The university gives me medical aid. I can go to a private health practitioner, a private hospital. I don't need to access public hospitals. So money which would have gone to public hospitals, etc., is now sitting in someone's pockets. There's no distinction between what is in the treasury and what is in my personal bank account. In fact, South Africa is actually quite novel. I want to be more positive. And South Africa gives the world new English words, like tenderpreneur, you know? Have you heard of that phrase? Tenderpreneur. So you've heard of tenders, right? Government tenders. And then you've heard of entrepreneurs. So we combine them, right? So you find the government guy giving out the tender, his wife's company winning the tender miraculously, even though she was only established, the company was established yesterday and has absolutely no track record, right? So, I mean, we are actually quite an innovative nation. We won't make an iPad, we won't come up with a new software operating system, but we do know how to play these games. I think worse though is the fact that the ANC has been deploying its cadres, its senior cadres, into senior government positions as part of the ANC patronage network. So you don't appoint someone, if the state needs an engineer, you don't appoint a good engineer, you appoint somebody who's a very strong ANC cadre. Now, I don't care if a person is a Republican or Democrat or atheist or Christian or Muslim or Jewish or something. Is he an engineer? Can he do the job he's supposed to do? So you have government services just collapsing around us. You know, there's no skill sets here. Believe me, there are skills out there, but you won't find it in government. In fact, I can promise you, the higher you go up into government, the more mediocre is the leadership, until you come to the very top, and the IQs will rival Down syndrome kids.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So you have a situation where service delivery, sorry, I'm not very politically correct. I know. Okay. So you have a situation whereby when you have these incompetent people operating, increasingly what you find is violent protests, what is called service delivery protests. At the moment in South Africa, I mean, when you walk around, it looks like, I mean, the University of Free State is like a bubble, right? Okay? You're kind of protected from the outside and stuff. But there are 13 violent protests every day in South Africa. 13. So much so that last year, the army changed its doctrine because the police were chased out of the townships. So now the army is going to be deployed. Now those of us who experienced apartheid in the 80s know exactly this is not good. In fact, the military men told the ANC, please don't put us there, because we are a blunt instrument. You tell us, look, those guys are bad guys, or take that hill, take it, we will do it. But you want to put a tank in a township, in a built-up area? We're not meant for this kind of stuff. Right? But no, this is what they wanted. So there's been a number of incidents where police and the SANDF, etc., have been deployed, and there's been a number of deaths. None of which, of course, gets reported by CNN, etc., right? You know, we're still living the miracle of '94. I mean, it's more a nightmare, but in any event. So I think, in my view, looking forward, I think civil strife in this country is going to intensify. I'm sure maybe you all have heard of this phrase called National Development Plan. So the government says, well, we have this plan to halve poverty, blah, blah, blah. It's all crap. It's not going to work, because in order to do that, you have to stop stealing, you have to stop using civil servants' positions to reward your political friends, and they don't really want to do that. Okay, so, but I think it's going to intensify. In fact, yesterday when I was watching the news, our unemployment rate has climbed to 5.2 million. Now, we're not the States, so we don't have 300 million plus population, we only have 50 million. And now what is interesting about that statistic is that 50% of the youth is unemployed. Now, if you go back to the Arab Spring, what caused that revolution was young, unemployed youth who had no prospects, and that's what I see. So I think this will intensify, and I also think that government policies are fundamentally anti-business, right? And it goes back to the whole ANC thing and the proximity to the former Soviet Union and Cuba and the East Germans and so on. This idea that business is bad, private sector is bad, government will generate jobs, government will do this, government will do that. So as a result, what you have the private sector taking their money and actually leaving the country. They would prefer operating in other African countries than operating in South Africa. These are South African companies, because it's hard to operate in South Africa with this anti-business law. In fact, a great book, if you want to get it, is the former president's brother, Mletsi Mbeki, wrote a book called The Architects of Poverty. And the Architects of Poverty is the ANC, right? And he wrote about how the ANC, inherited an economy which was practically first world, and how they deindustrialized South Africa, right? Now, the significance of that is that South Africa is increasingly we're going backwards, and we're relying upon selling primary commodities, right? Now, the two largest buyers of those primary commodities is China and India. But China is deliberately trying to slow down its economy because of inflation concerns. And India has some problems now with the Modi government coming in, so their economy is slowing down. Most economists believe, in any event, even with the best case scenario, China and India will continue buying our products until 2017, in which case, when they become post-industrial societies, they don't need our primary stuff, and we're screwed. We don't have an industrial base to fall back on, right? And our education system is not contributing to, there are jobs, but our education system is not contributing in terms of, because of the weakness of the education system, our education system is not arming the youth sufficiently to operate in terms of a modern economy. Okay. I should also tell you that our largest trading partner is the Eurozone. And according to Goldman Sachs, the Eurozone's problems are still going to be around for another decade, which means that they don't have the money to buy our goods, our markets are drying up there, and there's not enough people inside. We don't have a big enough domestic base to buy our products. So it's a triple whammy. We screwed all around, okay? And if your Fed tightens up on quantitative easing, we screwed again, okay? Now, the other problem in terms of economics, which is affecting us, which has an impact in terms of politics, is the fact that 2% of the population contributes 90% of our tax base. That's 2% of the population who earn more than 400,000, which is about $40,000, which is actually quite small, right? So, I mean, that's what you're talking about. Incidentally, we the country, we surpassed Brazil, and we're the country with the largest gap between have and have-nots, the Gini coefficient. So your Occupy movement can talk about 99% and 1%. I'll show them 99.9999% here in Sandton and Soweto, you know. Now, and at the same time, 17 million people receive social grants from the state. You can do the maths. You can't have 2% of the population taking out, and 40% of, putting in, and 40% of the population taking out. It's not a a good financial model. Ask the French, which is why Holland is in such crap right now. Now, how does the government deal with this? I mean, so these deep structural problems. And yes, some of it has been inherited by the apartheid state. Absolutely. But how is the government responding to this? Well, the government blames third parties. Some international horrible force and some insidious force called free enterprise is destroying South Africa. It's a form of neo-imperialism, it's all a socialist crap. Okay? And they keep raising the bogey. Now this is very interesting because they have their back to the wall and they have to deliver. And this year is the 20th year post-apartheid. People are saying, listen man, it's 20 years, you can't keep on blaming apartheid. What the hell did you do? I can understand you were handed a shitty deck of cards, but what did you do for the past 2 decades? I mean, we're going backwards, right? And so what the government now is doing is playing the race card. You know, oh, it's whites. Whites don't want to share the land. Whites don't want to share an economy. Blah, blah, blah. It's white South Africans. There's one big problem about this argument. First of all, if you look at the demographics, white South Africans are actually decreasing rapidly. We have more South African white medical doctors in England and Australia than there are white medical doctors in South Africa. Okay? The other thing is when you talk about land, there's more land under the native authorities of the chief than there are in white South Africans' hands. But no one talks about this. Right? Remember, South Africa has elements of a modern system of government. But traditional leaders, we also have a house of traditional leaders, and they also control a lot of territory, especially in rural areas. And they have powers. So, there's another aspect about this. The South African Institute of Race Relation has been tracking income inequality since 94. And the most interesting statistic which has come out of this is that most white South Africans are middle class. But the biggest income gap is not between white and black. It's between the top 5% of blacks, all linked to the ANC, and then the bottom 50% of blacks. It's not a coincidence that the richest black South Africans are all senior ANC members. Okay? So it's not like they did something, you know, they were Steve Jobs or something like that. No, these are your tenderpreneurs. And they're parasites. So my sense is that you're talking about 2018, 2019 will be the crunch time for South Africa, when this popular revolts will intensify, political disenchantment will continue. And you know what I really find interesting, two very disturbing issues, is the reaction from the ANC. First, Jacob Zuma, our beloved president, said that we as an ANC will rule until the second coming of Christ. I guess Christ will be here shortly. The second issue which I find most appalling is the factionalization within the ANC. The ANC has ceased to be a ruling party, political party. What they are a bunch of greedy thugs. Now the problem is that they don't actually have a vision for South Africa. They're not serving in public office for the benefit of South Africans. So what you find is, and they have no skill sets other than politics. So if you take like the Democratic Alliance, if a guy loses elections, he has a set of skills to go on. He's an architect, because they tend to be middle class. You know, he's an accountant, he's a lawyer, whatever. He will go back into private practice. These guys don't have that skill sets. So this started 2 years ago when we had our local government elections, where ANC members ordered hits and killed other ANC members because they were on the list and they were being replaced on the list by another guy. And of course, if you don't have access to political power, you don't have access to economic largesse. and the patronage networks and so on. So they were organizing hits on each other. And this trend has intensified. So if this ANC can organize hits on each other, why can't they organize hits on other political parties? They already tried to kill a journalist. So, yeah, sorry. Is there anyone who wants Prozac now? So that's all that I have to say, guys. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. Yeah.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Would you say many people in the country feel the way that you do toward the ANC? Or what is the larger social kind of sentiment toward the ANC?
Look, I think that popular disenchantment is growing, and I think this is the reason why the DA has been making inroads. The former, or what was perceived to be a white political party, is increasingly getting middle-class voters, black middle-class voters. But I still think that there's a residual loyalty towards the ANC for their anti-apartheid credentials. But I think with me, it's personal as well, you know. My dad spent 20 years in jail under apartheid. My brother was forced into exile. Apartheid security agents tried to kill my family. And there are, of course, many other South Africans who have had similar experience. But the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, you pay a price, and you pay a price for democracy. You don't pay a price for whatever this is called, kleptocracy, you know? And so it's personal, you know? So I'm sorry, I mean, I'm not even gonna try and attempt to tell you that I'm giving you an objective analysis. It's not. I feel emotional about it, and I'm not gonna lie about it.
From all of the speakers that we've had today, it's been kind of difficult to get a really emotional analysis of the situation or the topics that they've been talking about. So just your ability to do so unapologetically is, I think, something we appreciate, because we're here as learners. And we're upset. I know a lot of us have had conversations, and we're looking at this landscape, and it's so complex, and, you know, trying to relate it to what we understand of our history in the U.S., but then realizing how different it is. We feel emotionally connected or, you know, impacted.
You know what really gets to me, I think, and what really pisses me off, you know, is the fact that, you know, this country has so much of potential. I'm not just talking about, you know, natural resources and stuff. You know, I'm saying potential in terms of people. Absolutely amazing people. And for some reason, we're pushing it down the drain. You know? And I don't understand this. It is almost suicidal on the part of the state. And that's, yeah. And that doesn't make me feel nice. So, okay, can we just take
I'm sorry. With regards to understanding world dynamics within countries, I feel as though two concepts stand out in my mind: greed and complacency. Like when it comes to individuals in ANC, how you see them, it's greed that drives them. And the individuals that are just sitting back doing nothing, it's complacency that keeps them down. How does one explain that theory with regards to what's going on in South Africa and how things can change? I mean, yeah, things can change.
You know, recently in South Africa, I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, but my dad, you know, I was about 8 years old, and I didn't quite know what the difference was between an optimist and a pessimist. And so my dad told me a pessimist has more reliable statistics. So the thing about which surprises me about South Africa, and I'll get to your point, is that just when you think that you're reaching the bottom of the barrel, you get below. In any way, I mean, I thought Mbeki was bad, you know. Mbeki saying there's no such thing as AIDS, I'm not giving antiretrovirals, you know, etc., etc. And I thought, no one can be worse than this guy. And then Zuma came and I said, ah, shit, you know. But anyway, look, you're right in terms of greed driving the ANC, but I think the complacency, it's very hard to break the complacency, and I'll tell you why. The 17 million South Africans who receive social grants, they're not paying taxes. They're just getting money from the state. So the government is not creating jobs, but they're giving handouts. I mean, it's the same thing what Hugo Chavez was doing in Venezuela, and etc. Right? Okay. So whatever happens, I mean, as I said to you, Zuma charged with rape, supporters are there. Zuma charged with 167 counts of fraud, Zuma supporters are there. Whatever happens, Zuma has 17 million South Africans who are going to vote for him.
Yeah.
So the complacency is interest-based. Whereas I, who pay half of my salary in taxes, I'm pissed off with the corruption, right? Because my interest is fundamentally screwed up here, right? Okay, I'm pissed off. But you're not paying taxes, it's not your money. But at the same time, you are getting money from the state. What a great state it is. Superb. You understand? It's very hard to break that complacency. My fear, let me tell you what my fear is. And I hope I'm wrong, but increasingly South Africans are losing, especially young South Africans, they're losing faith in the political process to vote someone out of power. What they are doing, though, is engaging in extra parliamentary, extra political opposition. So you'll have areas in townships which are no-go zones, you know, where not even the police can come in, right? And they're engaging the state in running battles. So it's increasingly becoming violent. The thing about democracy is democracy gives people hope for change, right? If there's no possibility, because you know that whatever happens, these guys are going to rig it, you know, because they have their own politicians involved in terms of from the electoral commission, etc., then why vote? So you have increasingly large, especially in this last elections, what was it, 2 months ago? In this last elections, what was interesting for me was young people, unemployed people, young people who felt there is no hope for the future, chose not to vote. Not to vote. And that's very dangerous. Because if it's not going to come through Parliament and through the electoral ballot, it's going to come out on the street and it's going to be bloody.
That's the
Cage.
I just wanted to ask, would you say, what would you say is the reason that South Africans would rather vote for the ANC or not vote at all? And would you say that the commitment to the ANC, they have commitment to the ANC or the leadership of the ANC? When I say the ANC, I mean the ANC that Nelson Mandela left behind? Or is it commitment to the leadership, which is Zuma or the administration or the vision and the concept and whatever the ANC stands for? Where does the loyalty lie?
You know, if you go back to, I don't know if you saw the interview last night, I think it was on ETV, by Raymond Mhlaba, who was one of the last surviving Rivonia treason trials. He was with Mandela. I mean, he made the point clearly that the ANC of Mandela is dead. It's no longer that ANC of Mandela, right? I mean, do you still remember the first act, the first thing that Mandela did when he became president? When he received his salary, he said, but this is much too much for me. And he immediately halved it. I don't see such things coming from these guys, right? Okay, I think that the brand, the ANC, people are voting, they're not voting for Zuma, there's a lot of unhappiness with Zuma. But they're voting for that brand. And I think because there's still a residual loyalty for the ANC who delivered them from apartheid, right? But at the same time, people don't want to vote for anyone else because of that loyalty. But they're not complacent. They're engaging in running battles on the streets. 13 violent protests every single day. That's not complacent. But I think it's negative, it's destructive, that energy as well. So you need to give them hope in terms of the political process, that there can be change, etc., etc. I'm not sure how to break it. Yeah. So, I'm sorry guys, I have to leave you all. I have taken more than my time. But thanks again. I hope you don't get too depressed. But wish you all well. And should I? Yeah.
You're just gonna drop it.
appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you.
not talking.
Oh, okay. Well, he was actually saying that he knows how to say thank you. So thank you very much. Yeah.